Can't get enough of Team Pete? Well, you've come to the right place, as each week I interview supporters of Pete Buttigieg, former candidate for President of the United States and current Secretary of Transportation. Hear their personal stories about why they became part of Team Pete and how they started a movement. Join us as we talk Pete, politics, and anything in between. Hi everyone, my name is Kim Ang and I'm the host of this podcast, Talking with Team Pete. And today my guest is Jacob King, who is the author of this wonderful book called Thank You Barnstormers, right here. Hi Jacob.
Hello. I love seeing when people hold up my book. I don't know why. It's like I've got copies of it everywhere, but when I see it in somebody else's hands, it just makes me happy.
Yeah, I know. I actually ordered your book as a Kindle form, and then a good friend, a good Pete friend of mine from Illinois named John ordered the physical book
Nice.
and sent it to me. So thank you, John, for this wonderful copy. So Jacob, thank you so much for joining me today, and I kind of wanted to have you introduce yourself and where you're from, and I'm sure a lot of people will know about it from reading your book. But
Right. My name's Jacob King. Jay to most who know me, or Jake to a few. Looking at you, Julie Parker. I'm originally from Central Indiana. I've been living in East Tennessee now since 2005. But I'm still, consider myself a Hoosier, which is probably part of what caught my attention about Pete in the first place. Just, because I heard, somebody from Indiana was running, and that always catches my attention.
Now, I understand from your book that you are not much of a political person in terms of following politics and who's running for what office. You're more of, one of those regular voters who vote, but you don't really pay attention to what's going on in politics. So what kind of changed for you?
Yeah, that was the case, right up until the Pete campaign. I just always kind of, I voted, but that was it. I didn't really pay much attention to the politics going on. And then, when my wife kind of introduced me to Pete and I started listening to him talk and realizing, wow, this guy is what we need, especially because, during the previous administration, it was hard not to pay attention because of just all of the horrendous and asinine things that were going on. There was a lot of head shaking. And when I listened to Pete talk, as with most people, have experienced the same thing. When Pete talked, like, I felt this sense of calm and this sense of like, yes, this is what we need. This is who we need. And that kind of caused me to start paying more and more attention to the point that now, I'm not nearly as attentive as a lot of people are, but I am a lot more attentive than I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that, Pete kind of did the same for me in terms of igniting that, I guess, not so much love of politics, but awareness of politics and,
Right.
and what goes on and the people that we elect and the decisions that they make definitely affect our lives. So I understand from your book, and I'm going to unabashedly promote your book here. So I'm going to keep saying from your book.
If you do it, then I won't have to.
I know it's funny, like when Mike Pence was doing his book tour and the late night shows were showing these clips of each time that he said, in my book, I wrote, So I'll do the honors for you here.
Thank you.
So in your book, you described about how Pete caught your attention mostly because he adopted Buddy, who is
Right.
a one-eye blind puggle.
Right.
So what's this fascination about blind dogs?
Well, actually just as a joke, in my book, Foster, that book, it's actually, if you look at it, it's more of a pamphlet than a book. But, when I first started publishing, that was kind of a practice to learn the process. And that's, something that I wrote in an afternoon and then uploaded. But, Foster was our first, blind dog that Mandy and I adopted kind of almost by accident. He was a very special little guy, and in a very short amount of time, he literally changed our lives. He was not only blind, but he was also diabetic. And after he was, unfortunately, he was only with us for 13 months, but that was long enough to make an impact on us. And in the time since him, we have adopted many blind dogs, and most of them also being diabetic. In fact, we did a lot of volunteer work with the National Blind Dog Rescue Alliance, which is a great organization who specializes in blind and visually impaired dogs. And so because I have, this passion for blind dogs, when Mandy first told me, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana is running for, going to run for president. And I was like, okay, you hear of small town mayors and people like that, throwing their hat in the ring as a publicity type deal or whatever. And it's, it's nothing super serious. And I was like, yeah, okay. And then she told me, he's also gay. And I was like, okay. And I just really wasn't paying attention. And then, she's like, he's got a one-eyed puggle. And I was like, oh, really? And that's what caught my attention to the point that I actually paid a little more attention and listened to what she was saying. And then she showed me a YouTube clip of, I think it was Trevor Noah on the Daily Show, talking about, Mayor Pete. And I loved that little clip, and it was enough to just kind of like spark my interest. And that's kind of how it went. And it all came from, her mentioning Buddy. In fact, my book is dedicated to, well, you can't read it there, but it's dedicated to Buddy, the one-eyed puggle who made me stop and pay attention to what my wife was telling me about the guy from Indiana. So this book is actually dedicated to Buddy. Oh,
that's so sweet. Yeah, I don't think, did I? Oh, maybe I missed that part.
Yeah, it's right at the very front, just after the table of contents.
You're right. Oh, I completely missed that. Huh. Yeah, well, he's an interesting dog, isn't he? That would have been really nice to have him in the White House.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It'd been great for him to be, one of the first dogs, Buddy and Truman, living in the White House would be awesome.
Yeah. And so, you also mentioned, at the beginning of your book that, you're a Republican, a Christian, and a conservative. So I gather that there's a lot of that, of those in your neck of the woods.
Well,
so how did you?
Just for a second, I was a Republican, a Christian, and a conservative. And that, I no longer consider myself, Christian. I'm more agnostic these days. And I'm definitely not a Republican. I am 100% Democrat now. And I'm about as liberal as they come. And it was I kind of talk about it a little bit, but it was a very long, about 25-year transition from where I was to where I am today. And most all of that thanks to my amazing wife. If it weren't for her, I would probably still be one of those people that I hate. So I'm glad that, I am a former Republican conservative.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you met her.
Me too.
So yeah, she, is an amazing part of your journey in this book too. How did she feel about all of this in terms of, what you guys were doing? Did she, obviously she was all on board with it.
She was, and it says a lot about Pete and his ability to inspire people to become involved, in that Mandy is the type of person, has always been like a homebody who doesn't like to go anywhere, doesn't like to leave the house. I pretty much have to beg her to go on a vacation. And I mean, I worked for an airline for 16 years and we could fly for free anywhere we wanted to go. And we never went anywhere. But when it came time for it started with the LJ, when it came time to travel to Iowa for the Liberty and Justice dinner, I, said, well, do you want to go do this? Expecting her fully to say no, absolutely not. And she was like, yes, let's go. And the fact that she was willing to leave the house and travel for Pete says a lot about Pete and a lot about how much he inspired and motivated her.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like there are so many people out there who are like that, me being one of them as well, because I had no interest in politics, and the thought of going out there and talking to people about a politician just sends me into shock.
Right.
So the fact that, I don't know, where something inside just fuels that because you're so inspired by him to kind of make a difference.
Right.
Yeah.
And that inspiration, continues, in that, even though I'm not as, much of as a homebody as Mandy is, I like to go, I like to travel, I like to do things. But like when it comes to campaigning and things like that, and I talk about this in the book, I like door knocking, going canvassing. I hate it. I can't stand it because I freeze up when I'm talking to people. If they ask me a question that I'm not 100% prepared for, I lock up. And so therefore I've avoided it as much as possible. But even after the Pete campaign, it's so important to continue to try to save what little we have, to the point that here, just, in the past, few months ago, the Barnstormers had, midterm, trips where we went to swing states to do door knocking to try to swing the vote in our direction. And I went to all of them, and I went door knocking. As much as I hate knocking on those doors, I did it. And I mean, full disclosure, I didn't knock on a lot of doors. I did a lot of driving and a lot of other stuff, but I did knock on some doors. And it's just, even though it wasn't campaigning for Pete. I've said this before to a lot of people. Even today, the politicking that I do is for Pete, because eventually I hope there will be another Pete presidential campaign, and there needs to be a country for him to be president of. And at this point, we've got to do everything we can to try to conserve what we have. And that's why everything I do, if I'm knocking on the doors for Warnock, I'm doing it for Pete. If I'm knocking on the doors for anybody, I'm doing it for Pete.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think it's through that experience that kind of gives you a little more confidence, right, to continue doing those.
I mean, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. But I'm still not going to jump out of bed and say, hey, I get to go knock on doors today. It's going to be more like, all right, let's get this list over with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so funny, because when I was reading your book about your door knocking and how each time you guys go to a house where there's no answer, you feel very excited that there's no answer.
Right.
And I found myself just kind of laughing, because that was kind of how I felt when I went door knocking. It's like, oh, such a relief that there's, no answer and I don't have to talk to anybody.
And then the sheer panic when you hear the sound of the door opening. It's like, oh no, they're answering. Right.
Oh, yeah, I know. So who was braver, you or Mandy, in terms of trying to take control of if somebody does answer the door? Do you usually take the lead and talk to the person?
I think we did. When it was Mandy and I together canvassing, I honestly think there were only 3 or 4 doors that were actually answered. And I don't really remember who took the lead. It was probably it was probably me starting the conversation, but it was a group effort. She wasn't just standing in the background watching me talk to people. We were both interacting and kind of helping. Like when I froze up, she would take over. And when she got stumbled up, I would take over. We kind of tag teamed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So there's this part, where you talk about, I think it was going to the Iowa caucus, and, I think you had endured like a 14-hour drive. So you were quite exhausted when you got there, and then somebody offered to let you sleep in the hotel room on the floor with your sleeping bag, right? And then, I think it was, her name was Paula. She was, you were telling the story, and then she somehow managed to send you money for a hotel room that evening. And when I read that, Jacob, I started to cry because it was so touching to me that, this kind of human kindness that's offered to you. It's, I don't know, it just, it kind of embodies everything that Team Pete is about.
Absolutely. And this was someone that I had just met, just that evening. We just happened to sit next to each other. So I had booked my reservations for going to do the caucus based on my flying in on one particular day. And, then all the flights filled up. So, I flew for free, but it was all standby. And if the flights filled up, I didn't get to fly. So the flights filled up and I had to drive. So because of the drive times, I decided I was going to drive in a day earlier than I had planned on flying in. And when I went to book an extra room or an extra night at the hotel, the price had gone like almost double what it was when I had booked in the first place. And I just flat out couldn't afford it, especially once, I had to pay for gas and all that. So I put an ask out on the Barnstormer Facebook page. I was like, hey, I'm planning on coming in a day early. If anybody's got a room with an extra bed or even just a spot on the floor, that would be great. And, one of the lead Barnstormers there, Ariana, offered to let me, stay in their room. She's like, there's 2 beds that are both full, but you're welcome to have a spot on the floor. And it was, February in Iowa. I was just happy for a warm spot. And so I took my little backpacking air mattress and my sleeping bag and was all set up, ready to take my spot on the floor. And I was happy about that. And then, we went to dinner, and as I was telling the story of the drive and all that, and mentioned that I, had been lucky enough to find a piece of floor to sleep on. She was like, is the hotel like booked up? And I was like, no, I just can't afford it. And, she asked how much, the rooms were. And I told her, and, just as conversation, wasn't thinking much of it. And then was talking to somebody else, and all of a sudden I got a notification on my phone that, I had just been like PayPal'd the money, the amount that I had said the hotel room was. And I looked at it and I was like, what just happened? And, I looked over at her, and she was like, you've been driving that long. You need a bed. You don't need to be sleeping on the floor. And I like just hugged her. I was like, you are my new favorite person right now. And, that's just the way Barnstormers are, though. We take care of each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know, that story somehow touched me so much that I had to just stop and just take it in, and then there was another couple that you met at the airport, which was similar story, right? Of, I think it was Ron and Donna at the airport.
Yep. Yeah. Another chance meeting that turned into a huge thing and a great friendship. We're still in contact with Ron and Donna to this day. They're amazing people, and they're great friends. And it just, I was walking through, and I I talk about this in the book. I had, because, we were going to Iowa and it was, October into November at that point. I was like, well, we're going to be walking around, but it's cold. So we're going to have coats on. Nobody's going to see all of our Pete gear. So, I had bought a Cricut machine, which, is a little crafting machine that cuts out shapes and whatnot. And I used that to make, jackets. They were like fleece lined, cheap hoodies, nothing fancy, but, I put the Barnstormer logo on the back and I had the Pete 2020 up on the front. And apparently Ron and Donna had seen us as we were, going through security with those jackets on. And, as we were, once we cleared security and we were walking through, they kind of, flagged us down and they were like, are you Barnstormers? And we were like, yeah. And they were like, well, do you have a minute to talk to us? Cause, the Barnstormers, that was like kind of the first appearance of the Barnstormers and we were everywhere. So they were like, who are you? What is this group? What are the Barnstormers? And we, stood there and talked to them for a little while and, one thing led to another and, now we're, close friends and they've, I don't want to give away too much of what's in the book so that people will go read it, but, it ended up leading to it led to a trip to San Francisco and a meeting with Pete and, just, from meeting a couple of folks in the airport.
Yeah. And just, from that chance meeting, you got to do so many things because they were able to kind of help sponsor some of that. Is that my understanding? Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I feel like it's so wonderful what they did because they don't have the time to do, the types of volunteering activities that you did. And so they're in a financial position to be able to help you, accomplish that. So I thought that was really, really, generous. And I feel like, in the future, when Pete runs again, that, more people, can be like that as kind of, sponsoring others.
There are always ways to help. If if you don't have the time or the physical ability to go do the door knocking yourself, there may be people who are very happy to go do it that just, can't afford, a plane ticket or a hotel room. And, you can be like, well, here, I'll take care of that. You go do the knocking.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great, tag team kind of teamwork, way of doing it, especially if people want to get involved, but they are unable to. Yeah. It's wonderful. You mentioned the Cricut machine. So right. I'm kind of curious, like, why did you take on this project of making your own stuff rather than buying things?
That all kind of came, that was kind of Mandy's thing. I should have had it here to show, but, it all came from, when Mandy first told me about the LJ, the Liberty and Justice dinner, it was from where she had seen, I guess Barnstormers kind of talking about it in the very beginning. And there were some YouTube videos of what were called, sign wars during the Obama, campaign. And, she talked about like, how they all meet in this big arena and there are, thousands of people there. And, a lot of people say that, Obama's, LJ speech, it wasn't the LJ back then. It was something else, but it was that dinner. His speech there was kind of the turning point for his campaign. And she had said she thought it would be really neat if, we could, at that point she didn't think we would be able to go, but, if we could make something, that would draw attention. And she was like, maybe if we could make like signs that lit up or something like that. And that kind of, led me, I've always been the figure it out, think about it type guy. And I was like, I could make something. I don't know how. And I kind of played around with it a little bit. And I said, well, I've got an idea for how we can do this, but in order to make it in the quantities that you're talking about, because she wanted to make, a couple hundred of them at least. I was like, the only way to do it good and do it right, I would need a Cricut machine. And she was like, what's that? And I was like, well, it's a machine that cuts things out. It's a crafting type thing. And she was like, well, how much is it? And I was like, hey, they're kind of expensive. I think they're like, $300 or $400. And she was like, does Michael's have them? And I was like, yeah. She was like, go get one. Which again, Mandy's the type. I was an aircraft mechanic. I have Snap-on tools. If something's expensive, I like it. I'll buy it. But Mandy never wants to spend money on anything. And cause she's just a very frugal person, which is probably good because it's, helped keep us out of the poorhouse because I would spend us into debt quicker than anything. But, when she was like, go get one, I was like, right now. And she was like, they're open, aren't they? And I was like, yeah. So I went and I bought the Cricut like right then and there and taught myself how to use it and ended up making, these kind of like oval signs that were about this. Well, I used 8.5 by 11, cardstock. So, it was an oval that was 11 inches wide and 8.5 inches tall. And I cut out the Pete logo from it and then, made a way to put a flashlight up into it so that it would glow. And we made, I don't remember the exact number, but we made quite a large number of them. And then, those, we were going to forward on to the LJ, and then we decided to go ourselves. So we just took them with us, and that's kind of how it all got started.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a lot of work because I remember during COVID that I wanted to try a new hobby, which was crafting. So I researched about sublimation printing as well. But I was fascinated about the Cricut machine that you used, and to be able to make all these things yourself. The amount of time and energy that you guys put into this is just above and beyond anything I could imagine. Because I was reading your book and I thought, oh my gosh, I know I love Pete, but I don't think I love him this much to dedicate this much time. So where was that drive coming from? To do all this?
It wasn't like anything we had to struggle for. We just wanted to do it. When we were making the signs, when we were going and doing the things, it was so much fun. It's, one of the, main rules of the road, is joy. Just being with the Barnstormers made us so happy, and, touching back on, I think one of the first questions you asked me, I never actually answered. You were talking about, where I live and Republicans. We live in East Tennessee. It's with the exception of downtown Knoxville, overall East Tennessee is a very, very red, very conservative, very scary place for a liberal person to live. And, we don't have many folks that we hang out with around here. It's kind of just us. And being able to be in a group of like-minded people was just so invigorating and refreshing. And it, we felt so relaxed when we were amongst our Barnstormer friends, to the point that we wanted, when one event was over, we were like, when's the next one? What can we do to get ready for it? We were just always ready to go, wanting to do more. And, it got exhausting at the end. Just as Pete, just before Pete suspended his campaign, we were like starting to feel the pressure and the stress, but it was still fun. It was still an enjoyable experience.
Yeah. I know there was one trip that you took, I think it was after the Iowa caucus, when you had to drive to Houston for work.
Right.
And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, is he going to make it through this blizzard? It was kind of...
So yeah, I again, ended up having to drive to the caucus, and so one of my roles at my previous job, as I said, I was an aircraft mechanic, and one of the things that we had to do was taxi the aircraft, like drive the airplane like from the maintenance facility to the gate, and back and forth across the airfield. And when not every mechanic was, we'll say, licensed to drive the aircraft. Only a few of us were. And once you got trained and got checked off to be able to drive the aircraft, once a year you had to take a check ride to make sure, that you still were doing everything correctly and all that. So there were I think 3 of us at the hangar who were what they called check airmen, which is more of a pilot term, even though we're not pilots, but still they called us check airmen. And, our job was when somebody was coming up needing their annual review, we would jump in an airplane with them. They would drive to the gate. We would make sure they did everything correctly, and then we would sign them off and they were good for the next year. Mm-hmm. Well, those of us who were the trainers that did that, we had to have a check ride every year too, but we weren't allowed to check ourselves out. We had to go to the headquarters in Houston to like the full motion flight simulator, even though we were only taxiing, but we had to go to the full motion flight simulator once a year for a check ride. And my check ride was scheduled for just a couple of days after the caucus. So when it turned out that I was going to have to drive to Iowa, I didn't have time to drive back. I might have had time, but it would have been really tight. Didn't really have time to drive back to Tennessee to then catch a flight to Houston for my check ride. So I just drove from Iowa to Houston. Cause it was pretty much like the very next day I had to be in the simulator. And, so that led to all kinds of stress driving from Iowa to Houston because there was a blizzard like coming that way and I couldn't stop because if I did, I'd get stuck and all that to get down to Houston to find out, oh, by the way, the flight simulator's out of order. So we'll reschedule you for next month. And I was like, guess I could have gone home, but
yeah. Yeah, some of your stories are quite harrowing.
They can be. It's funny because there's kind of a recurring like joke in the book, and I mean it was all true. It's stuff I experienced that I'd be on a drive somewhere between here and Iowa or here and wherever, and it's like, well, this is how I die, and
right.
I've spoken since with other barnstormers who had similar experiences while on road trips where, they were, one group was driving between, I think it was Las Vegas and Reno. And in the middle of nowhere, something happened and they were like, well, so this is how I die. And it's like, so apparently that's a common theme among the, barnstormer road trips.
Yeah. I found your stories, very entertaining, and some of them made me laugh. Some of them made me cry. So I'm so grateful that you wrote this book because I know that there are a lot of people who were part of this Barnstormer, group that, did so much for Pete's campaign, and for you to share your experiences, just makes people kind of relate to it because I certainly did, some parts of it, but the more scary parts, like driving in the snow and wondering if you're going to die is, not something I'd want to experience.
Most of those, oh, this is how I die, were just my very tired and, like crazy imagination, just kind of like going wild with things, I mean, I was never really in much danger. It's just, you've been in a car driving for, 6-7 hours and you've still got, several hours to go and your mind just kind of starts drifting. And next thing you know, I've got these whole elaborate things in my head that I'm looking back, they're hilarious, but it's just how it goes. Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to drive a long distance, without any weather issues, but, all of the blizzards and snow and stuff that you encountered, I don't know what I would do if I was out there in that weather. I'm glad you made it.
Yeah.
All right. So, there's another part in your book, about the borough pride, that I wanted to ask you about, because this is where you had this old guy come up to your booth, right? And, was asking you these questions about what you were doing there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So, the town of, Murfreesboro, just, south of Nashville, had their pride event called, Borough Pride. And the Nashville chapter of Tennessee for Pete had, scheduled us to have a booth there to represent Pete at Borough Pride. And, Mandy and I, drove out there to assist with that. And, we were the ones with the canopy and the tables and most of the swag and all that kind of stuff to give out. So we got there first to kind of get things set up. And, just prior to, it was like downtown Murfreesboro on the town square, like around the courthouse type area. And when we showed up a couple hours before, we got there a little early, there was a farmer's market that was just kind of shutting down. So they were like, well, once the farmer's market's cleared out, this is where your space will be and you can get set up. Okay. So once we finally got to where we could get everything set up, and most people pretty well were set up, it was still, maybe I wanted to say it was about a half hour before the actual events were supposed to start. People were kind of getting there early and starting to walk around, and this older guy kind of, comes in just kind of looking around at things. And, we've got a table out there with buttons and ink pens and all kinds of stuff out there. And, I'm pretty sure looking back at it, that guy had no clue what he was at, what kind of event he was at. I think he probably thought he was at the farmer's market. Maybe he was still there from the farmer's market, but I'm pretty sure he was not there for the Pride event. And, he picked up one of the ink pens and he said, he's like, can I have one of these? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Help yourself. And he's like, now who is Pete? And I said, well, Pete is, Pete Buttigieg, and, he's running for president. And he was like, for president of what? And I was like, well, president of the United States. And he goes, oh, well, then we sure hope he doesn't win, don't we? And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, that's why I have this tent and all this stuff I'm giving away, is because I hope he doesn't win. But, I'm trying to bite my tongue and, be, respectful and nice and all that. And I just but as I'm thinking, he just starts going off about, how great Trump is. And I'm just like, okay. And and I'm trying not to argue with him. I'm trying to keep a calm head. And he said at one point, he was like, Donald Trump is the only president that's ever treated the United States of America like the United States of America. And to this day, I don't know what that means. I'm like, okay. And then he kept going on, and he said something about, I served, and he started talking about his military time. And I said, Pete's a veteran. And, and I said, he served and all that. And he kind of just kept rambling on. And so I got a little bit kind of frustrated. And I was like, didn't Trump dodge the draft? And he stops and he goes, can you prove that? He goes, there are some people who say that Jesus Christ was a draft dodger. Again, not really sure what that means. And I was like, and he just kind of kept going on. And I'm like, okay, I just want him to go away. And I said, look, sir, it's obvious that I'm not going to change your mind. And I can tell you right now, you're not going to change my mind. So you have a nice day. And I don't know why that worked, but it worked, because he just stopped and turned and walked off. And I'm like, and I'm looking at Mandy and the other people there in the booth. And I'm like, what just happened? And all of a sudden, he was probably a booth or so away. And it dawned on me, and I said out loud, not loud enough that he could hear me, but loud enough so that the people in the booth could hear me. I was like, hey, come back with my pen. But yeah, that was the Borough Pride experience. I mean, overall, the rest of the event was great. It was a good time. And then, I talk a little more later on about the Christian protest that was marching around, but then the police, finally kind of got them all into the corner where they were still doing their little chants and holding up their signs. But then, a counter protest showed up and kind of drowned them out. They started singing louder than they were chanting. They had their own signs, and, it was the Church of Satan was the group that was there doing the counter protest, which at the time I didn't really know anything about the Church of Satan. So afterwards I looked into it, and it's like, it's not like the demonic devil worshiping thing that comes to mind. It's more of a satire, type of organization about, freedoms and love and understanding. And they showed up, and they basically got the the church crowd holding up their signs that says, God hates fags and all that kind of stuff. Those were the signs they were walking around with. The Church of Satan drowned them out to the point that they ended up leaving. So I was impressed. I was very impressed and happy that they were there to, show support for the good side.
Yeah. Well, I was really impressed by how you handled him, because I think in that situation I would be very frustrated too and would just want him to leave. But you did it in a way that would make Team Pete proud, because
I was trying to follow the rules of the road the best that I could. Sometimes it's difficult, but you gotta do what you can.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's one of the great things about Team Pete is this ability to kind of censure ourselves. I don't know if that's the right word, but just to be more mindful of what we're about to say, or let our emotions get ahead of us. And I think that, that's one of the traits of Pete, right? Is that he's so calm.
Yeah. And being a representative of Team Pete kind of forces you, if you're in the proper frame of mind, it forces you to be a better person, because you're representing Pete. And I know that when, being a supporter of Pete for quite a while, forced me to be a better driver, because I turned my little blue Fiat into a Pete mobile. I had the big Pete 2020 magnets on the side. I had Pete stuff all over the back. Right. I even had personalized plates made that said, Tennessee for Pete. And if I was in traffic, I had to be careful. I couldn't be flipping people off. I couldn't be cutting people off. It forced me to reduce my road rage tendencies. So Pete forces you to be a better person. It's a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. That I do remember now pictures of your little Pete mobile, and how all these Pete emblems were on your car. So yeah, you're right. It does kind of force you to be like Pete when you are in public and not act like a lunatic.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the things that I treasure most about Pete's campaign is the people that I met through it. What would you say is your most favorite part about it?
That's really a big part of it, is the connections made, the friendships made. Our family has grown through barnstorming. I talk about that in the book. I mean, I hesitate to mention any names because I don't want anyone to feel left out. But I mean, people that come straight to mind, like, George and Lara and, just so many people, Ron and Donna, and I'm going to have to start trying to make sure I mention everybody, Julie and Lisa, and,
this is like your Oscar thinking, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't forget.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of these people that we never would have met were it not for the Pete campaign, were it not for the Barnstormers, that now are such an important part of our lives, is what I'm most thankful for. I mean, just that those connections, that extended family is the greatest thing. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there are several members of my Barnstormer family who I believe I would rather spend time with than members of my actual family. So.
So I take it your family is very conservative and Republican?
Yes and no. It's mixed. We do our best to just not discuss it much, because it's never a good conversation. So, we see each other around the holidays and, try to play nice, and that's about it. I've got, one sister who thinks more of the way I think, and one sister who thinks a little bit opposite of what I think. And, I love them both. They're both my sisters, but, there's one that I chat with more than the other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, so during the course of your volunteering, did you ever try to convert any of them, and in terms of becoming a Pete supporter at all?
I know I told all of them that, I expected them to vote for Pete, even if they voted for no one else. But I never shut up about how awesome Pete was and how much he was the guy that we needed. And I think, some of them may have just been agreeing with me to get me to shut up. I think some of them actually agreed with me, but, I definitely talked to him about it a bit, but, I don't know if it did any good.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to change people's minds, that way, especially when they're so rooted in that kind of thinking, right? And so as someone who used to be like that, I mean, how did you get yourself out of that, that frame of thinking?
As in, how did I make that transition from conservative to liberal?
Yeah.
So I talk about it a little bit in the book. I went to my high school years, just for 4 years, I went to a very, very strict conservative, Baptist private high school. And that's kind of where I got those Republican, conservative views, because, you hear it 5 days a week and that's all you hear. You assume that must be truth. And, I held on to that for quite a long while. And then after high school and, it was after I met Mandy that, things kind of started swaying a little bit because, because of that particular school's teachings, I believed 100% things such as, being homosexual was a perverted choice that one made and had nothing to do with, who they were. It was just, it was all an act of rebellion. They did it to rebel against God. That's kind of where my head was, because that's what I had heard for so long. And then I started dating Mandy, whose mother just happens to be lesbian. And that, made for, it's not like, we discussed those types of things at, family dinners, but, just being around her mom, made me kind of start to realize, hey, wait a minute, she's a good person. She's not, some rebelling from God pervert. She is who she is. And, honestly, being around Mandy's mom was probably a part of what started kind of, chipping away at it and starting to change my views to where, I went from, it's absolutely, wrong and it's a choice to, well, it's their choice. It's up to them to, no, that's just who they are to, hey, it's not my business to tell anybody anything, I've said, for a bit now that, in this, look, okay, life is short. Life is very short. And true happiness is very, very hard to find. And if you find someone who makes you truly happy, then I'm happy for you. I don't care who that person is. I don't care what gender that person is. I'm just happy that you found happiness. And it took a lot. It took years for me to go from one side to the other. And now I mentioned this a little bit in the book, I look back on who I was, on things I believed, on things that I said, and I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed of things that have come out of my mouth. I mean, to this day, every now and again, when you log into Facebook and it's like, hey, here's your memories from today. And I look at something and it's like, 18 years ago, you shared this. And I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that I hope nobody saw that, because it's just so horrible that, I can't believe that that's how I believed. I can't believe that that's how I was. So, it gives me hope that, not everybody's a lost cause. People can be brought around, but it's a slow process. And, I honestly, I don't know how I got from there to here. There was like no one thing. It was just like slowly over time, as I learned more and as I got away from that closed mindedness, that I started to evolve as a person and into who I am.
That's beautiful, Jacob. It really is. And I guess we can say that Mandy is your savior.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. I know. I feel like, when I hear things like what you just mentioned about gay people and all that, it's very hurtful because these people don't know who you are. So why is how you live your life, how does that even affect them,
Right.
Like just marriage equality on its face value. It's like, okay, well, if you don't want, gay couples to get married or because you think that, it's going to ruin civilization. I mean, how do you go from that thinking? I mean, I just love your transition of how you went from that to how open-minded you are now. And I just feel like there's just so much propaganda that's feed to people all the time. And how do you get out of that bubble?
Yeah, I don't know. I wish if I had the answer to that, I'd be, I may not be a rich man, but I'd be a more popular man than I am. Because I used to have this conversation with people at the airport that I worked with because they were very, very, very to the right, and they, believed what they believed, and I was an idiot for believing what I believed, whereas I believe they're idiots for believing what they believe. And you make your own personal choice as to what is truth. And, for me, I watch, not so much anymore, but, just to give an example, say I watch MSNBC and I listen to what they say and I'm like, this is correct. This is, they're giving an unbiased view of what's out there. And I choose that as my source of information. They watch Fox News and they believe that, they are giving an unbiased view of what's out there. And it's a complete like yin and yang. I mean, my MSNBC says it's A. Fox News says it's B. If I'm on this side and I believe what MSNBC is saying, then it's A. It's absolutely A. Right. Well, these people over here, no, it's B. It's absolutely B because we have chosen where we get our information from. Right. And until you can figure out a way to convince them that their information is false, and that's hard to do, they're going to continue believing it because, that's what they accept. That's what they take in. And, I'm not saying that MSNBC is 100% correct. I'm not saying that Fox News is 100% wrong. Well, yeah, I would say that. But, I mean, they're obviously, one is leaned one way, one is leaned the other. And until we can figure out a way to make all media sources completely unbiased and report nothing but the facts, you're always going to have that. And I don't know what the answer is. I wish somebody did.
Yeah, it is hard because it's like each side is in their own little bubble, right? And each side thinks that the other side is always wrong.
Right.
And so I feel like, Pete is always there to kind of bring both sides together because he's again, so good with that.
Yeah, that goes to Pete's brilliance and Pete's ability to reach across the aisle, as it were. And that how many times has Pete gone on Fox News? And, that a couple of times caused me to watch Fox News, which I never thought would happen. But B, it presents our side to the people who only watch Fox News. And that's what Pete said was, you have to go to where the people are. And, because he got a lot of like, not really ridicule, but a lot of people when he, said he was going on Fox News, they were like, why would you do that? And it's like, because that's where the people are and they need to hear it from me.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's the brilliance of him is
absolutely
to be able to convey the message in a way that doesn't put the other side down, but to also be able to allow them the chance to listen to what we have to say.
You have to be able to present yourself in a way that is opening and intriguing to make people want to hear more. You know, you can't walk on Fox News and be like, y'all are a bunch of morons. Even if that's what you believe, you can't say that. You know, you have to present in such a way to make them say, hey, wait a minute, what was he talking about? You know, that's why for the longest time, you know, I keep going back to the airport and the hangar because that's where I spend all my time. For the longest time, I was kind of like in the closet as a Democrat, as a liberal. You know, I never talked politics. I had a couple of Pete like bumper stickers that I had put onto a magnetic base so that they could be removed. I put them on my car. When I got to work, I took them off and I threw them in the trunk because I didn't want to have to deal with it. And once I got my Tennessee for Pete license plate, I was like, well, I can't take that off. So I was like, forget it. I just left everything on. And I was really kind of surprised that people that I never would have dreamt would come up to me and say, you know, like off to the side away from others, they would say, hey, tell me about this Pete guy. And it blew my mind because I found out that I actually did have a few friends in the hangar that I didn't know. But when I would start telling them about Pete, you know, I would tell them the basics and tell them, you know, what I liked about him. But it always went to, here's a link to a YouTube video. Go watch it. And I would send them links to Pete interviews and Pete speeches because I can tell you about Pete all day long and, you know, maybe you listen, maybe you don't, but most people that hear Pete speak get it, you know, because nobody can promote Pete better than Pete. And if you can get somebody to just sit down and listen to one of his speeches or one of his interviews, you've got a really good chance of convincing them that, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. That was one of the things that always just impressed me so much about Pete was listening to him talk. I never felt like I was listening to a politician. You know, I actually believed everything he said. You know, when other politicians are saying, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And then the reporters say, hey, that's great. How are you going to do that? How are you going to pay for that? And they're like, oh, I've got a plan. I've got a plan. Whereas Pete would go out there and say, hey, here's what I propose. Here's how I feel like we should pay for it. And I've got full details on PeteForAmerica.com. Everything he did was thought through and planned out. That's not a politician. That's a man that knows what he's doing, and that's who we need.
Yeah. He's a public servant for sure.
Absolutely.
Because everything that every idea that he has is to help improve our lives, right? Not so much his life, but the American people. Yeah. So, throughout all of your experience, you got to meet Pete, a couple of times. So what was your impression of him? I know you said this in your book, but.
Okay. So the first time that I met Pete was, in Nashville. Mandy and I we were the East Tennessee coordinators for Tennessee for Pete. Basically by default because there was nobody else in East Tennessee at the first meeting. So we kind of got voluntold to be the coordinators. And, so when we found out, through the Tennessee for Pete group that, Pete was going to be doing a couple of events in Nashville and they were going to need volunteers to help with them, you know, we were like, hey, we're in. And there were 3 events. One was a VIP event. One was kind of a mass, you know, everybody event. And then the other one wasn't really a Pete event as much as it was a fundraiser for the I think Davidson County, Democrats. It was a breakfast the following day. So they needed volunteers for the VIP event and for the larger event. So Mandy and I volunteered for the VIP event thinking, you know, and rightly so, it's a smaller event. There, you know, we'll have a better chance of kind of getting up close and having a chance to see him a little better. So, and I kind of go into detail about where we volunteered and the roles that we played. But, that was the first event of the day. And the larger event was not really across town, but it was a little bit of a distance away. And it was like immediately following, and the first event ran long. So, Pete was kind of sort of running late to the next event, and his, the campaign folks that were there that were kind of coordinating everything were basically trying to kind of rush him along. And we had been told at the beginning, you'll get a photo with Pete, you'll get to meet him. Well, when we were there and we were watching as the event started, all of the people who were there that had paid, donated to be there, they got to meet Pete in a photo line where, each one got to go up, shake his hand, get a picture, talk for a second or two and move on. So that's kind of what we thought we were going to get to do. Mm-hmm. And then when we were kind of gathered up out in this larger room, for us to get to meet Pete, they had us separated into two groups. They had us separated into the catering, food service group, and then into our, volunteer group. And what the coordinators were trying to make happen was to get Pete to step in front of one group, quick group photo, move to the next group, quick group photo, and out the door. And Pete wasn't having it. Pete took the time to shake the hand of every single person there volunteering, to look them in the eye, to say thank you, and not to be rushed out the door by his campaign staff. He took that time to make sure that we each felt appreciated. And when he shook my hand and said, thank you for all your help, thank you for being here, I believed it. I didn't feel like he was just going through the motions of, hey, thanks, hey, thanks, hey, thanks. Mm-hmm. I felt in that moment like Pete Buttigieg was thankful that Jacob King was there that day to help him with his campaign. Mm-hmm. And that just experience was phenomenal to feel like I was actually appreciated and not just, hey, thanks for the help, I got to go. He took the time to actually speak to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is very touching. And I know that a lot of people feel that way about him too. So was there any other parts of your meeting with him that kind of stood out? In that meeting, there was one large group photo taken, but, one of the other volunteers had a really high end professional grade SLR camera, was off to the side snapping pictures as, Pete was shaking everybody's hands. And Mandy had, again, she was all about helping making the swag and stuff. And she had Tennessee for Pete wristbands made, and she was giving one of those to Pete. So as she's handing that to Pete, there are 3 or 4 great pictures of her and Pete, getting her hand and all that. When I shook Pete's hand, I had been rehearsing in my head what I was going to say the whole time. Cause I knew that there was a chance I might get to meet him, but I was only going to have a few seconds. So what I said was, thank you for giving me hope. Well, one picture was taken of me shaking Pete's hand, and it was taken from the side as I was mid-word you. So what you saw in the picture, in my picture of me and Pete together, is a picture of me making a face at Pete. Cause from the side, all you see is that kind of stands out about the meeting. But then there were other meetings and other photo ops. So I got a really good picture of me and Pete together at a different event. Oh, good. That's wonderful. Well, Jacob, thank you. I think that our time is up. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely.
And
thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And one final plug. If you just go to thankyoubarnstormers.com, that'll take you straight to the buy page on Amazon. If you buy it, that's awesome. If you read it and if you love it, I would have to please ask, write me a review on Amazon. Right now, I only have 4 reviews, and in the world of Amazon book sales, it's all about the reviews. The more reviews you have, the more people may actually buy the book. And my thinking is I need as many 5-star reviews from friendlies as I can, because the next time Pete runs, because there will be a next time, I have a feeling that there's a chance people just searching for Buttigieg on Amazon may find my book, and trolls may start leaving 1-star reviews. And I would rather have a whole bunch of 5 stars to outweigh that before it happens. So if you've read the book, please leave me a review. And I'm done with the promotions. Thank you very, very much for having me on your show.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. I did leave a review for you this morning,
Awesome.
actually.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I watched this book to be out there in the public sphere as much as possible. So like Jacob said, if you're listening to this, please go buy his book and read it, and you will be pleasantly surprised as to his stories and the wonderful kind of behind the scenes of what it's like to be a volunteer for Pete and the extra mile that people go through for Pete. I definitely hope that he will run again, and I'm sure that all of us will be there waiting and ready to work.
Absolutely. I'm ready to go again. Let's do it.
Yeah. I love your shirt and your hat, and I should have worn my Pete gear today too. But
as I was planning for the interview, I was like, what am I going to wear? And I was like, you know what? The LJ was like the quintessential Barnstormer event. And this is the shirt that I wore at the LJ. And then this hat, I talk about it in the book. This is the hat that I had signed by Chasten on the day of the caucus. So.
Oh, right. That's right. That's lovely. Wow. That is some great souvenirs for you then.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Sounds good.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. So I had forgotten to ask Jacob why he wrote this book. So Jacob, please tell us.
and the honest answer is, like, in the beginning, I don't know. I don't really know what caused me to want to do it. I just, I had started. So, I mentioned several times, about my time at the airport and working for the airline. And that came to an end in 2020 when the airline that I worked for, ceased operations. They didn't survive COVID. And my career came to a screeching halt. I'd been with ExpressJet Airlines for 16 years and had every intention of retiring from there. And then like I said, they didn't survive COVID. So, in the process of my trying to decide, what am I going to be when I grow up? There were a lot of stressful, sleepless nights, because even though I could have gotten another job with another airline, I could to this day, a better paying job, but we would have to, pick up and move. And as much as the East Tennessee area isn't really conducive to a liberal lifestyle, this is our home. We don't really want to up and go anywhere. So, aviation wasn't really an option. And so there were a lot of stressful, sleepless nights. And one night, late in the middle of the night, I was watching YouTube, just, couldn't sleep, was watching YouTube videos at random, and an ad popped up for a course that you could buy on self-publishing and how you could make money doing that. Mm-hmm. And usually commercials like that, I just skip. You get 15 seconds in, you hit skip ad, and you go on. But something about that ad just caught my eye. And I watched a 3-minute commercial, which led me to watching a 2-hour webinar, which led me to buying this course on how to publish books and, make money. And that's kind of what I've been doing primarily as my career. I mean, I write books under a pen name using the method that they set up. And in fact, this book right here is the number one best-selling soil science book on Amazon right now, written under the pen name of Bruce McCord, which is an homage. Bruce was my mother's maiden name, and McCord was the last name of my best friend in high school, who both passed at an early age due to cancer. So my pen name is kind of in honor to them. But I went with a pen name because a lot of things associated with my name are very, very political. And I don't want to make people not buy my book because of my politics. So I went with a pen name. So I was kind of getting into the whole publishing thing. And a lot of the method that I use, for these books, I do a lot of the writing, but I also get assistance from some ghostwriters and things like that. So I wanted something that was completely mine. I wanted something that I had written myself. And, I had just kind of been thinking about, I kind of want to write a book about, the barnstorming thing, I don't know why. I just kind of wanted to. And then I started hearing that other people were, and then I saw Boots on the Ground by, Lisa, Fleischman had, hit the stands there. And I was like, well, I want to do that. So coming up on the Soulcraft Summit, I was like, hey, I'm going to do this. And, Julie and Lisa had said, well, hey, if you want to put something in the swag bags telling people about your book coming up, then you can do that. And I'm like, yeah, I'll definitely do that. So I made up a cover and, put a, coming soon and passed it out to everybody. And then, the process took a lot longer than I was expecting. And, next thing you know, a year's gone by and then almost, a few more months. And, it took a while, but it was a lot of fun. And it was like going down memory lane, trying to remember this stuff. And honestly, if it weren't for like Facebook and if it weren't for, like the Google Maps timeline, which a lot of people find creepy, I didn't even know existed until I started working on this book. But if it weren't for those things, it probably wouldn't have happened so as I was writing a chapter, I was trying to remember the name of a restaurant in Des Moines. So I brought it up on Google Maps thinking, well, when I see it on the map, I'll know what it is. And I saw the restaurant and I was like, okay, that was it. And off to the side, I see where it says, you visited here 2 years ago. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it was like, click for timeline. And I clicked on the timeline and all of a sudden it shows me this map of Des Moines and it shows the path I took, where I was, what time I was there throughout the day. And I'm like, well, that's creepy.
Yeah. but informative.
But informative into where I was able to use that tool to look through my day. It's like, okay, the morning of the LJ, we left the hotel at this time. We went here. We did this. It reminded me of so many things that I had completely forgotten about that ended up becoming a big part of the story. So, and then being able to go back on Facebook and put in a specific date and see the posts that people made, see the pictures people made. Those things were huge helps. And also shout out to Pat Fury. He shared a lot of photographs with me that sparked reminders and reminded me of things that happened, and all that led to the book. So, that's kind of how it happened. I mean, as far as like why I wrote it, it was just kind of like, that might be fun. And then it kind of got, but then when I made the announcement, it became, oh, well, now people are expecting it. I kind of have to do it. So that kind of forced me to finish it.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I mean, I think it all starts with you wanting to do that, you wanting to do it. And from there, the inspiration grows to actually do it. So yeah, I'm thankful that you did. All right. Well, thank you, Jacob, for that